can you share any details about any recent polling that you've done, any studies that you have done, any interesting research?
Well, there are some macro trends that we are following in Canada, and they're largely in three buckets. The first is just general public sentiment, how well things are going in the country, how satisfied people are with the direction, confidence in our leadership, economic sentiment, that etc. And what we're finding is that in the last 2 years, Canadian resiliency has really been challenged. And that is demonstrated in our data on some of these macro issues that we're following. So on a net basis, just take 2 years ago, in the end of 2020, tough year, pandemic year, lockdown, etc. Public sentiment was a net -7, and a minus means that there are more negative people than positive in terms of the assessment of how things are going generally across some of these economic and political measures. Fast forward now to the end of 2022, so 2 years, that -7 is now a -21. So where we were leaning negative 2 years ago, we are now decidedly negative. If we look at another key issue, financial health, and people's assessment, whether or not we can break people down into 4 buckets, whether they're thriving, surviving, sort of treading water, or sinking, essentially. And again, at the end of 2020, which was sort of a weird year because some people did really well because they weren't spending any money, and other people who got laid off and were unserved weren't doing quite as well. The net financial health of Canadians was 0. Essentially, the equal proportions thriving or better, and equal proportions treading water or sinking. And again, fast forward 2 years, we go from 0 to -16. So that balance of financial health now, where it was neutral before, is decidedly negative. And the third sort of significant issue that we've been tracking over the last 2 years is what we call social cohesion. Well, what does that mean? It essentially means how well are we knitted together as a society? Do I care about my neighbors? Do I care about other people who live with me in Kitchener-Waterloo? Do I feel I have things in common? In Kitchener-Waterloo, I have things in common with somebody who lives in Drumheller, Alberta. And how well am I, or to what degree am I willing to prioritize the collective, other Canadians, over me as the individual? And what we found is that 2 years ago, through the first 6-8 months of the pandemic, we were in it together. We were willing to sacrifice for the common good, and to put the benefit and the well-being of others ahead of our own. And then the pandemic became a little bit more political. Vaccine passports were introduced. Not everybody was on side, other restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. The K-shaped economic recovery was being exacerbated, more people struggling, but also more people doing better off. That disparity, that difference between the upper 20% and the lowest 20% was growing. And as a result, now what we're seeing is social cohesion has dropped. So 2 years ago, at the end of 2020, social cohesion was a net positive 11 points, meaning more people feeling good, prioritizing the collective over the individual, plus 11. Fast forward to the end of 2022, and we now are at -9. So we've gone from prioritizing the collective to now prioritizing me over we. Social cohesion in Canada is declining. And one of the things that I reflect on, my background is in political science, is I distinctly remember, second year American politics with Dr. Barry Kay at Laurier, and he would say, one of the key differences between America and Canada is that in America, it is more about the individual. If you look at the preamble to our Constitution, in Canada, it's peace, order, and good governance, right? Prioritizing the collective. In the United States, it's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is property, which is individually owned. So two very fundamental differences to how the countries were set up, and the collective versus the individual. And in Canada, what we're seeing now is that we are sort of morphing into a more American style of priority and a more American style of social cohesion, where it's me against we, where we have a sort of a splintering of political ideologies and approaches, more divisive approach. And I lament that a little bit. That makes me a little bit sad that we're losing what I thought or came to understand through not just my education, but my understanding of public opinion data, of something that was, perhaps quintessentially Canadian.